In 1241, on the fields near Liegnitz, Poland, Duke Henry II peered across the horizon, and his heart sank at the sight before him. Thousands of Mongol tents stretched as far as the eye could see, their campfires burning through the night in countless numbers. A low hum of activity echoed throughout the valley. Scouts brought back unsettling reports, an innumerable host, like ants or locusts, amounting to at least 100,000, perhaps even 200,000 warriors. Duke Henry swallowed hard. He commanded only 25,000 men, even with Europe's elite Teutonic Knights among them. The odds were 1 to 4, maybe even 1 to 8. But there was no alternative. Failure to confront them meant the fall of all Europe to these eastern nomads. What transpired next was unfathomable. Duke Henry suffered a crushing defeat. He was beheaded, his head paraded through the city on a spear. Nearly 40,000 lives were lost, and Europe trembled. Yet there was a crucial piece of information Duke Henry never learned. His forces were not, in fact, outnumbered. He actually commanded more soldiers than his adversary. The Mongol army that day consisted of only 8,000 to 20,000 men. So, what exactly went wrong? Before I reveal the answer, please share in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is for you. I'm genuinely curious about the diverse time zones tuning in to learn about Mongol history. The story I'm about to tell will completely overturn your perceptions of the Mongol army and offer a profound lesson about the true nature of power. Sometimes, it's not about sheer numbers. Strategy dictates victory or defeat. Let's begin by debunking an 800-year-old myth. When you picture the Mongol army, what image comes to mind? Likely millions of horsemen, an ocean of people and steeds, sweeping across the Eurasian continent. Astounding figures: 500,000, 700,000, even 1,000,000 warriors. This is how textbooks, films, and even many historical accounts have portrayed them. However, modern scholars have unearthed the truth. The entirety of the Mongol army at the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227 comprised only about 100,000 to 130,000 actual soldiers, not millions, nor even hundreds of thousands concentrated on every battlefield. The entire empire's army totaled just 100,000 individuals. Let that fact sink in. Alexander the Great led a larger army. Rome, in its prime, commanded a far more numerous military. Yet, the Mongol army, with this modest count, conquered more territory than any empire in history, from the Pacific Ocean to the Black Sea, from Siberia to Persia. How was this even possible? To understand, we must trace back the origin of these exaggerated figures. Rashid al-Din, a 13th-century Persian historian, wrote that the Mongol army numbered over 600,000. Another historian, Juwayni, claimed their forces reached 800,000. Medieval European chroniclers reported even more incredible numbers, with some documents citing Mongol armies in Hungary of 500,000 men. But contemporary researchers, cross-referencing with the most reliable source, The Secret History of the Mongols, a Mongol text written immediately after Genghis Khan's death, discovered the truth. Genghis Khan's core army initially consisted of merely 23,000 cavalrymen. Yes, 23,000. That's the force with which he began his world conquests. By his death, after decades of warfare and recruiting from conquered lands, the entire Mongol army amounted to approximately 123,000 to 129,000 people, according to Rashid al-Din's records, a more credible source given his position in the Mongol court and access to military documents. Crucially, this 100,000 figure represented the empire's entire military. They never concentrated all these individuals in a single location. The army was organized into numerous tumens, units of 10,000 men, which operated independently on various fronts, separated by thousands of miles. When the Mongols invaded Europe in 1241, their combined invasion force was only around 8,000 to 100,000 individuals, including allied Turkic and Russian tribal detachments. This force was then divided into 3 or 4 separate armies, each following its own route. In Poland, where Duke Henry confronted what he perceived as a massive Mongol army, there was actually only a smaller detachment, a diversionary force numbering about 8,000 to 20,000. This is why credible modern documents, such as the History of the Mongols, indicate 10,000 Mongol horsemen invading Poland. So, why did everyone believe them to be far more numerous? The Mongols were masters of psychological warfare, and one of their most potent weapons wasn't their bows or war horses. It was fear.
Imagine yourself a European spy, tasked with reconnoitering a Mongol camp at night. You ascend a hill and look down, witnessing thousands, perhaps tens of thousands, of campfires glowing in the darkness, stretching to the very horizon. Upon your return, you report, the numbers are countless, like the stars in the heavens. We are doomed. Yet, you are unaware of a crucial detail. The Mongols deliberately ignited more campfires than necessary. Every small detachment was instructed to light several fires, fostering the illusion of a colossal army. This tactic was premeditated and well documented throughout history. And that wasn't their only deception. The Mongols also employed decoys. They attached armor and weapons to mannequins, placed them on spare horses, and allowed these horses to trot alongside their troops. From a distance, the enemy would perceive an army 2 or 3 times its actual size. However, the grandest illusion didn't stem from these stratagems.
It originated from the Mongols' combat methodology. Imagine yourself as a European knight, accustomed to familiar European warfare tactics. 2 armies array themselves opposite each other, then engage in a decisive clash. Victory goes to the stronger force, the one with more soldiers. But the Mongols disregarded these conventions. The moment you arrange your formation for an assault, you witness a contingent of Mongol cavalry appearing on your right flank. They unleash a volley of arrows and vanish. Before you can react, another group emerges from the left, discharges more arrows, and retreats. Then from the rear, then again from the front. You pivot right, left, turn around, yet they are nowhere. You begin to think, we are encircled. They must possess an immense host to attack from all directions simultaneously. But in truth, it was merely the same cavalry group, moving with incredible rapidity, striking from various angles.
Each Mongol cavalryman typically owned 3 to 4 horses. When one horse tired, they would switch to another. This enabled them to cover between 100 to 150 kilometers daily, a pace unmatched by any European army. The Persian historian Atta Malik Juvayni described the Mongol cavalry as more numerous than ants and locusts, or desert sand, or raindrops. But this wasn't an exact count. It was the impression they created. There's even an interesting observation from Pian Karpin, a European monk who visited the Mongol Empire. He wrote that Mongol flanking maneuvers frequently led opponents to believe their numbers were far greater than reality. And here's the paradox. King Hatum I of Armenia, who witnessed Mongol battles, wrote the opposite. He asserted that due to the Mongols' dense and disciplined formations, their actual numbers were often underestimated, not overestimated. These 2 conflicting observations reveal much. No one precisely knew how many Mongols truly existed. And that was precisely what the Mongols aimed for. Uncertainty breeds fear, fear engenders errors, and errors lead to defeat. Now for the most astonishing revelation. In most major battles, the Mongols were actually outnumbered by their adversaries, rather than outnumbering them. Impartial researchers meticulously analyzed the primary Mongol battles in Europe and concluded that in the majority of confrontations, they were significantly inferior in numerical strength. Let's examine 3 crucial engagements. The Battle of Liegnitz in 1241. Henry II, the Polish Duke, assembled a formidable army of 25,000 to 30,000 warriors. It included Teutonic Knights, Templars, and Hospitallers, Europe's elite warriors. They wore heavy armor, were professionally trained, and possessed high morale. They faced a Mongol diversionary force led by Khadan and Batu Khan. The most reliable estimates put this force at only 8,000 to 20,000 horsemen. A contemporary document, The History of the Mongols, reports around 10,000 men. The ratio? At least 3 European warriors for every Mongol cavalryman.
and potentially 1 to 3. Yet, the outcome was a complete rout for Europe. Nearly 40,000 dead, including over 500 Templar knights. Duke Henry was decapitated. The Battle of Mohi in 1241, just 2 days after Liegnitz, was a decisive engagement in Hungary. King Bela IV gathered one of the largest armies ever seen in Europe, 100,000 warriors. Indeed, Hungary was renowned at that time for having Europe's finest cavalry. They confronted the main Mongol army commanded by Batu Khan and Subutai. According to reliable accounts, the Mongol forces numbered approximately 80,000, and only a fraction of these were actual Mongols. The rest were allied troops from conquered territories. The Hungarians outnumbered them by at least 20%. They fought on their home turf. They had the advantage of terrain and supply lines, but the result was an even worse catastrophe than at Liegnitz. An estimated 60,000 Hungarians perished. The Mongols collected 9 sacks of severed ears, their custom for counting the slain. The Battle of the Kalka River in 1223 marked the first time the Mongols fought on European soil. An alliance of Rus principalities and Cumans amassed a large army to halt the Mongol advance. It is believed they had between 80,000 and 100,000 warriors. Generals Subutai and Jebe, at the head of a Mongolian reconnaissance force, commanded a modest contingent estimated at 20,000 to 30,000 troops. They faced a numerical disadvantage of at least 3 to 1. Nevertheless, the Mongols skillfully employed a classic military deception. They feigned panic and simulated a retreat. The Russian army, convinced of their victory, pursued them relentlessly for 9 days. By the time they reached the Kalka River, they were exhausted, hungry, and their formation was completely fragmented. There, the Mongol army awaited them in full force, decimating their adversaries. Do you perceive a pattern? In every major engagement, the Mongols were outnumbered, yet they consistently triumphed. Their victories were decisive, delivering such devastating blows that all of Europe trembled. Therefore, the pivotal question isn't about the size of the Mongol army, but rather how they managed to conquer despite their numerical inferiority. It is at this point that the narrative truly captivates. If numbers weren't the determining factor, what endowed the Mongol army with such formidable strength? The answer lies in the flawless convergence of 5 elements: organization, training, technology, tactics, and, most critically, adaptability. Organization, the decimal system. Genghis Khan revolutionized military structure. He completely dismantled the archaic tribal system, instituting an entirely new framework based on the decimal system. The smallest unit, an arban, consisted of 10 individuals. 10 arbans formed a jun, comprising 100 people. 10 juns made up a mingan, or 1,000 individuals. Finally, 10 mingans constituted a tumen, numbering 10,000 people. It appears straightforward, and in that simplicity lay its power. This system offered exceptional flexibility. A tumen could operate independently or synchronize with other tumens. A jun could detach for a specific mission and then reintegrate into the main group without losing time to reorganization. And here's the crucial aspect. Genghis Khan dissolved tribal divisions. He intermingled individuals from various tribes within the same units. Their allegiance shifted from tribal chieftains to their specific unit, their commander, and ultimately to the Khan. Training from childhood. A Mongol child's equestrian training began at the tender age of 3. Initially, they were securely fastened to the saddle to prevent falls. By 5 or 6 years old, they could ride confidently. Archery instruction commenced at 7 or 8. By 14, the age of military conscription, a young Mongol man possessed over a decade of combined riding and archery expertise. They could accurately shoot while galloping, fire backward at a full run, and change horses while in motion without stopping. Contrast this with a European knight. A knight might be masterfully trained in melee combat, but their horsemanship was often acquired later, and they rarely mastered mounted archery. Moreover, they wore cumbersome armor weighing 30 to 40 kilograms, severely restricting their mobility. A Mongol cavalryman wore only leather or light armor, weighing around 10 kilograms. They were light, agile, and unburdened. Technology, the composite bow. The primary weapon of the Mongols wasn't the sword or spear, it was the composite bow. This bow was constructed from 3 layers of materials: horn on the inner side to resist compression, wood in the middle, and sinew on the outer side to resist tension. This design provided incredible power within a compact size, perfectly suited for mounted use. A Mongol bow could shoot arrows up to 200 to 250 meters. At distances up to 150 meters, they could aim with high precision. And here's the terrifying detail. Every cavalryman carried 60 arrows in quivers on their back and saddle. A tumen of 10,000 meant 600,000 arrows. Imagine such a deluge of arrows raining down upon enemy formations. Tactics, the art of feigned retreat. However, the most decisive element was their tactics, and the signature Mongol tactic was the feigned retreat. Here's how it operated. A group of Mongol horsemen would attack, unleash arrows upon the enemy, then turn and flee. They would appear to be in a panic. The enemy army, convinced of victory, would launch a pursuit. The Mongols would continue their flight, all the while firing arrows backward as they retreated, an extraordinarily difficult skill mastered only by them. They would entice the enemy into a chase for hours, or even days, as happened at the Kalka River. When the enemy was exhausted, their formations broken, and far from their base, the entire Mongol army would emerge, encircling them from all directions. By this point, the enemy was too fatigued to fight effectively and too distant to retreat to safety. It was a perfect trap, and Europe fell for it repeatedly. Speed, unparalleled. Yet, all of the aforementioned would have been futile without the final factor: speed. As noted, each Mongol cavalryman possessed 3 to 4 horses. This enabled them to cover distances of 100 to 150 kilometers per day, an unimaginable pace. In the Middle Ages, a European army could typically manage only 15 to 20 kilometers per day. This advantage proved immense for the Mongols. They possessed the ability to appear in unexpected locations at unforeseen moments. They could launch attacks, retreat, outflank, and then strike again from an entirely different angle before their adversaries could react. A particularly striking example illustrates this. Following the Battle of Liegnitz in Poland, a Mongol detachment needed to relay a message to their main forces in Hungary, situated 450 kilometers away. The dispatch was delivered within 36 hours in 1241. There were no phones or telegraphs, merely horses and a flawlessly executed relay system. You might now be wondering, that's a fascinating tale, but what relevance does it hold for me? I'm not a 13th century Mongol cavalryman. However, that's precisely the point. The narrative of the Mongol army transcends a mere historical account. It's a story about enduring principles of triumph. These principles remain pertinent even today. The first lesson: quality trumps quantity. In the contemporary world, we frequently obsess over statistics. Companies boast about their employee count. YouTube channels take pride in their subscriber numbers. Entrepreneurs flaunt their production outputs. Yet the Mongols teach us the inverse. They didn't command vast numbers, nor did they possess cutting-edge technology. Composite bows had existed for millennia before them, but they mastered the art of maximizing their available resources. A Mongol horseman underwent training from the age of 3 to 14, amounting to 11 consecutive years of preparation. This exemplifies quality, its peak performance. In your endeavors, you might not have abundant resources, but can you leverage what you have in the most refined manner possible? The second lesson: order prevails over chaos. Genghis Khan's decimal system appears straightforward, but its power lies precisely in its simplicity. Everyone understood their role. Every unit comprehended its mission. There was no confusion, no squabbling over authority. When a commander issued an order, it rapidly cascaded down a clear chain of command. Contrast this with the European armies of that era, a chaotic assembly of feudal lords, each with their own army, each pursuing their own agenda. The Battle of Liegnitz saw knights from Poland, Silesia, Lithuania, Teutonic Knights, Templars, and Hospitallers, all under the nominal command of Duke Henry. In reality, they struggled to coordinate their actions.
In business, in life, do you operate with a clear system, or do you find yourself amidst disarray? The third lesson, adaptability outweighs brute force. What's remarkable about the Mongols is their continuous learning and flexibility. Initially, they lacked proficiency in besieging heavily fortified cities, but during their conquest of China, they acquired siege tactics from Chinese engineers. They hired these engineers and transported them to Persia and Europe. When soldiers were needed, they recruited from conquered peoples, Turks, Persians, Russians, and integrated them into their army. Crucially, they didn't treat them as slaves, but trained them to Mongol standards. When they required a fleet to assault Japan, they constructed an armada of 5,000 vessels and 70,000 sailors, despite the steppe-dwelling Mongols having no prior maritime knowledge. This is adaptability, the humility to assimilate what one doesn't know. In today's rapidly changing world, adaptability is more crucial than ever. Are you prepared to embrace new knowledge, or do you cling to what you already know? The fourth lesson, perception shapes reality. The Mongols understood that warfare extended beyond the physical battlefield, encompassing the adversary's mind. They deliberately fostered the impression of an overwhelming army. They left ravaged cities as a warning. They permitted rumors of their ferocity to proliferate, not because they reveled in killing. Indeed, cities that surrendered remained unharmed, but because they sought to ensure the next city capitulated without resistance. This strategy proved incredibly effective. Some cities opened their gates and surrendered simply upon hearing of the Mongols' approach, without even sighting a single soldier. In the modern world, branding, marketing, and image continue to hold immense significance, not for deception, but for establishing an accurate representation of the value you provide. The fifth lesson, measure and optimize. There's a small yet fascinating detail about the Mongol fighting approach. Before each battle, they would arrange a pile of pebbles, each representing a single soldier. After the battle, they would collect the pebbles one by one for each survivor. The remaining pebbles symbolized the fallen or severely wounded. This was a simple yet effective system of measurement. It allowed commanders to precisely determine casualties and adjust their tactics for succeeding encounters. In life and work, do you measure what truly matters? Do you learn from outcomes and implement adjustments? Returning to Duke Henry on the fields of Liegnitz, upon seeing the Mongol army, he believed he faced an immense, invincible force. He fought courageously, but with fear in his heart. This fear led him to make errors. He fell into a trap. He allowed his battle formation to disintegrate. He lost before the actual fighting truly began. However, a critical question arises. What if he had been privy to the truth? Had he known that their numbers were not, in fact, superior to his own, and if he had grasped Mongol tactics and prepared accordingly, the course of history might have diverged significantly. This encapsulates the ultimate and most crucial lesson. Knowledge is power. Victory hinges on comprehending your adversary, discerning the true state of affairs, and understanding yourself. The Mongol army, with a mere 100,000 individuals, forged the largest empire in history not through enchantment. Their triumph stemmed from superior organization and training, the deployment of more effective strategies, and most critically, a profound understanding that success wasn't predicated on sheer volume or the abundance of resources, but on the astute management of available assets. You might perceive a deficit in funds, time, skills, or connections. You observe others, presuming they possess greater advantages. Yet this could be a mere illusion. Perhaps they, too, operate with limited resources, but act with cohesion and swiftness. It might be that you don't require millions of followers, but rather 100 enthusiastic kindred spirits. Or, instead of mastering every conceivable skill, perfecting a few core competencies could suffice. The Mongolian narrative stands as a potent reminder. Never underestimate the capabilities of a unified, disciplined collective driven by a clear objective. 100,000 Mongol warriors successfully overcame armies numbering in the millions. You, with your current resources, can achieve outcomes that appear unattainable to others. Now, I'm keen to hear your perspective. In your view,
Which lesson from the history of the Mongol army holds relevance in contemporary life? Share your insights in the comments section. Should you find this video valuable, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel to support its growth. Bear in mind that in life's battles, triumph isn't secured by the largest army, but by those who most judiciously employ their strengths. Thank you for watching.